thinking and going the right way in life would automatically actually bring in such opposing spirits and arch devils, if not the devil himself, who opposes you, such as Plex, he can to entangle you up into the worship of an idol through perplexity. Well, no man that warreth entangleth himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please of him who hath called him to be a soldier. So therefore, you are automatically entering into battle when you talk about the actual living Word of God, the Word of God being the spiritual Word of God, as coming from a spiritual source and not coming from your own carnal imagination, or not coming from the dead and empty spiritualized words of Satan as coming from the anointed cherub. This chain of command passed down as from Satan down into hierarchy angels, such as second or third in command, being Oplex and enticing you into the worship of an idol. This is the battlefield. Well, all of that to say this, and again, like taking a leap into the spirit world or the spiritual line of thinking, which you can do really is purely through your thinking, call upon the name of the Lord and he will appear. And so, draw nigh to God and he will draw nigh to you. So we're going to jump into the prophecies of Daniel. And you kind of picture yourself, yes, I was sitting here thinking myself, imagine you found yourself eventually in the halls of heaven and all of these great saints are wandering around. And of course, many there might picture themselves going up to these great saints and asking questions. Well, you think, when you look at the prophecies in Revelation, the John taken up into the spirit world to get a glimpse into that time period of the afterlife, and he sees a great multitude. And one of the 24 elders says to him, "What are these?" And John says to him, "Sir, thou knowest." And he says, "These are they that came out of great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." So that simply automatically tells us that we're going to go through the great tribulation and wash our robes in the blood of the Lamb. Maybe you picture your robes, your robe of righteousness. I think you've been given when you received Jesus into your heart. Well, yes, that's true, but you could get this robe of righteousness, which is a gift of God, can get dirty along the way, and therefore will have needs to be washed as going through the great tribulation. These are they that have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. The blood of the Lamb being, in a sense, let's say, a very basic sense, like your robe is in a great washing machine, and the blood of the Lamb being the soap powder. It's a very basic way of seeing it in symbolic senses, but to go through the great tribulation will be like thrown into the bagwash of it all in the last days, and you needing to go through this like a saint that needs to be made white by the great tribulation. Hence, the great tribulation has its purpose in making the saints white. And at the same time, the saints being still here to preach and being a good example to those in the world that are tangled up in all of this, being the last days and the great tribulation under the reign of an antichrist, when he seeks to consolidate all of his ill-gotten gains, which he pursued to do throughout the centuries, throughout the ages, as from the Garden of Eden, even right up to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Satan will be cursed, the great serpent, which is the devil and Satan, will be cast out of heaven into the earth. And the voice is heard, "Woe unto the earth, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath. For he knoweth that he have but a short time." This is the great tribulation, the devil trying to consolidate all of his ill-gotten gains on the earth. And all of his ill-gotten gain plans all going wrong at this point, when in the midst of the week they break, he breaks the Holy Covenant. He presenting himself as the Prince of the Covenant. And then going back on his own words, something Jesus, I think God would never do, the true Prince of the Covenant being Jesus Christ. Jesus would never go back on his word, come what may, come facing death. Yes, he would die rather than go back on his words. Whereas the false and fake Messiah will betray even his said own people, being the children of Israel. The hierarchy in the children of Israel always felt they had a dig with destiny and were destined to be the apple of God's eye. Jerusalem set up as the capital of the world, and they being lords and masters and priests and having their temple back and ruling and reigning here, while the rest of us being Gentiles and heathen kind of outsiders. Well, this doesn't appeal to the average saint who finds himself as merely a stranger and a pilgrim passing through all this and feeling kind of unearthed here. Well, imagine you could take this leap into the great hall of heaven at the second coming of Jesus Christ, and there you are in the midst of all of these great saints that have gone through the great tribulation. Well, you might at that point wonder, well, I guess all of these saints down through the ages have had their great tribulations and great trials and troubles and tests. So it's not kind of largely an exclusive club to those who went through the great tribulation just before the second coming of Jesus Christ. There are, of course, other saints down through the ages that have gone through their great tribulations, had their robes washed by the blood of the Lamb. We obviously understand the blood of the Lamb better in the New Testament era, better than they did in the Old Testament era, but they all had the view and the vision that the Messiah would come. And therefore they endured all of these great hardships. And one of these, of course, was Daniel. Well, would you have the audacity to cheat to walk up to Daniel and feel you could hobnob around with him? Well, you might at that point think, well, I could never compare to some of these great saints. I'm too flawed as a human being. Maybe you'd rather decline on that, though others might feel they could enter in and hobnob around. Wow, depending upon who you are and what your perception of reality is, might view how you fare or how you picture yourself in that afterlife. Personally, I'd rather hang around with the smaller people. It's so much freer for someone like me. Well, should you be able to have a conversation with Daniel? Well, you might say to Daniel, well, how did all of this begin? How did it all begin with all of these various visions? You being the main man of the last days, bringing to light to the world has heard of the Antichrist. The word Antichrist comes up largely in the writings of John the Beloved. So we have this phrase, this term, the Antichrist. There are many Antichrists in the world, but we know that Antichrist will come. So there's been those that have been Antichrist that put themselves in place of Christ, in other words. And ultimately the Antichrist will come. Well, the book of Revelation talks about this same person. Maybe it doesn't call him the Antichrist, but we know in Revelation chapter 13, it's talking of the same person. But largely, the prophecies of Daniel largely far surpass the rest. So you go up to Daniel and you'd say, well, how did all this begin with you? And all of these prophecies that you got regarding the last days, and all of your prophecies, as I understand them, you prophesied of grey ages that would come and go. You prophesied into the future, and you're looking hundreds and thousands of years into the future with the eventual rise of an Antichrist, but not stopping there, but with the eventual second coming of Jesus Christ. And all of your prophecies leaped over grey ages, grey time periods, grey empires. You found yourself in Babylon, and then you foresaw the Medo-Persian Empire coming. This would rise and fall, Medo-Persia being a dual empire. Then you foresaw the rise of Greece following Medo-Persia. Then you foresaw the rise and fall of Rome. And then you foresaw the rise and fall of the Antichrist world empire. And then you foresaw the second coming of Jesus Christ and the saints of all ages, and Jesus now giving the kingdoms of the world over to the saints of all ages, and they now ruling and reigning here on this earth. So quite a leap, and you think, well, what other days and ages did Daniel prophesy? He prophesied of so many great days and ages, and also some of these time periods in between some of these great days and ages and world empires that would rise and fall. What about our day and age? Is this in the prophecies of Daniel? Well, our day and age largely summed up and consisting of dictatorships and democracies. This is what we have now here, autocratic governments and dictatorships and democracies, which largely is also summed up in really capitalism and communism. This is the world split into two in the last days. Did you foresee our day and age? And maybe if you had this conversation with Daniel, yes, he did. Well, so to simply backtrack here, sometimes the thing is with a lot of the prophecies in Daniel, to understand what you need to understand is this is indeed an ongoing conversation with particularly angels. If not one angel's name comes up, then this angel's name is Gabriel. So God has appointed Gabriel to work together with Daniel regarding these prophecies, regarding the end times, and regarding these great ages that would come and go, these great world empires that would rise and fall, until eventually we would have the rise of the Antichrist, and these various great ages that would also rise and fall. In the midst of these, so our own day and age also prophesied in the writings of Daniel. And this really comes up in Daniel chapter 2. It's important to take a leap into the future. As from Daniel chapter 2, this being an ongoing conversation with an angel. So sometimes the angel in the future sense, so the angel turns up largely in Daniel chapter 2. Largely Daniel chapter 2 doesn't mention an angel, but Daniel was given the king's dream. The king had a dream. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he didn't understand what the dream meant. He'd even forgotten the dream, so he gets all of his wise men in and threatens to kill them all, turn their houses into dung heaps if one of them doesn't tell him the dream. Well, Daniel of course prays, and God gives him the exact dream that he had given to Nebuchadnezzar regarding the future of the whole world, right up until our day and age. And then following this, the second coming of Jesus Christ. Well, Daniel, as a young boy, found himself going into captivity. Nebuchadnezzar had annexed Judah, the children of Israel, had been taken over in short by Nebuchadnezzar, destroyed the temple. And he took some of the children of Israel into captivity, Daniel being one of these. As a small boy, was taken into captivity. Well, it's interesting here. So, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it, right? So he besieges Jerusalem, takes it over, destroys the temple, ransacks Jerusalem, takes all of these special artifacts out of the temple and makes them his own, and takes into captivity various children of Israel. This is how it all began with Daniel as a young boy, taken into captivity of the king of Babylon's empire. So quite a sad story for Daniel to suddenly have to be turfed out of his own land, everything he ever knew, and to be taken into captivity as a young boy. So this is how it all began with Daniel. And the king Nebuchadnezzar, right, spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed, and of the princes, right? So the king's seed, one of these happens to be Daniel, children in whom was no blemish, but well favoured, skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace. So Daniel suddenly taking a leap here from one kingdom into another, and suddenly he finds himself in the king's palace. And in this king's palace, Daniel would indeed rise to the top of government here. He would operate at the top of Nebuchadnezzar's government as one of the king's special advisors, seeing his speciality was that God had given him a gift of understanding visions and prophecies and dreams and such. So a very unique gift given to Daniel, and this unique gift given to Daniel, starting out in Daniel chapter 2. So in short, Daniel interprets the king's dream. This is important because it talks about our day and age. If we want to understand, it's the day and age we're living in. We're kind of in between. We know of history in the fall of Rome. We know there's going to be the rise of an Antichrist world empire. And we know we're in kind of an intermediate kind of stage in the development of the future of mankind. And here we are in what's called the feet of the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2. We are indeed in the feet. So most people have never read these prophecies. This might mean nothing. The problem is here you haven't got a lot of time, so you try to do these as short as possible. Well, in short, King Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and Daniel interprets the dream to the king, right? The king threatens to kill all of the wise men. None of the other wise men, soothsayers, seers, and astrologers, etc., none of these that are into the New Agey kind of aspects of spirituality could interpret or tell the king his dream. But Daniel, of course, prays, and God gives him the exact dream. And Daniel gives him the interpretation of the dream. And so it says in verse 21, chapter 2, right, of Daniel, "Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible," right? So we're witnessing now the future of the whole world. In short, this dream, this vision of this great and terrible image, he goes on to explain this image's head was fine gold, right? This is Babylon. His breasts and his arms of silver. This is Media Persia, the kingdom that would dual world empire that would follow Babylon. His belly and his thighs of brass. This is Greece. His legs of iron. This is Rome. His feet, part of iron and part of clay. Well, this is where we are. We're in the part of this great image, which is part iron and part clay. So in other words, part dictatorship, part democracy. This is so important in understanding the future. Now, in all of these prophecies, Daniel's attention was always brought to the last kingdom or time period of the prophecy. Of course, God at that time was concerned about Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, and so on. But the main focus and the main thrust of the visions of Daniel was always the last days. The last days was the main thrust of the vision. So the angel or the visitation or the dream would give him some kind of background history as to how we got to where we are. So thou sawest, so he sees this great image, this terrible image. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands. Now this is Jesus Christ, right? The stone, right? Thou sawest that till that stone was cut out without hands. So it's not a kingdom made by man. It's a kingdom of God. It's cut out without hands. It's not man's world empire coming to earth. It's God's world empire coming to earth. It's not something that man has shaped and formed with his own hands. Man, as a rule, worships the works of his own hands. No, this is God's empire. This is the Son of God. This is Jesus Christ. The stone cut out. Thou sawest till that stone was cut out without hands, not of man, which smote the image upon his feet. They were of iron and clay, and brake them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, the gold, all of these former world empires. Don't forget, they're still here today. They might have different names. Babylon will be still here today. Media Persia will be still here today. Persia is now called Iran. Greece is indeed still here. Rome is indeed still here. Well, all of these kingdoms, when Jesus comes back, though they might have different names, be under different kings, be under different time periods, might not now be world empires. All of they're all still here. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, and the silver, and the gold broke in pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, the wind of change now, you might think, that no place was found for them. And the stone, this is Jesus Christ, the stone that the builders disallowed, right, the main cornerstone, the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we would tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Well, this is Daniel, in essence, getting these dreams and leaping over world empires, and then stopping at in the end times. The main thrust of the dream being the end time, the future before Jesus returns. Always man's great world empires culminating with the rise of an antichrist. The man at his best being man at his worst before the second coming of Jesus Christ. This is the climax of man, the anti-climax of man, not the evolution of man, the devolution of man, until Jesus Christ returns, this being the main thrust and essence of these prophecies of Daniel. Well, is our day and age in this dreams and prophecies of Daniel? Yes, indeed, it is. We're in the feet of this image, the time period just before the second coming of Jesus Christ, the time period when this stone cut out without hands, this great kingdom of God that's going to become a great mountain and cover the whole earth, will indeed smite the feet of the image, and all these kingdoms of man will be blown away like the chaff in the wind. Well, begs the question, what does it say about the toes, the feet and the toes where we are? So this, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay. Now this means democracies, right? Part of potter's clay, the last days. What have we got now? Great wars, great raging battles, great politics and all this. The great democracy in America, the great epicenter of the communist world being Russia and China and so on. So you've got dictatorial, autocratic governments and communism versus you've democracies and these clay governments and capitalism, all of this in the last days, all prophesied by the great democracies. Well, the great democracies aren't so great because in the prophecies of Daniel, there is mixed and mingled with them the iron here being the dictatorial kingdoms of the world. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes part of potter's clay and part of iron, this is democracies and dictatorships in the last days, communism and capitalism and so on. In short, democracies and dictatorships usually under communism in the last days and democracies under said capitalism and so on. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. This is where we are now in a divided world, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron. Well, you might think, okay, we're part of the democratic Western world, and out there they're all part of the communistic, dictatorial, non-democratic world. Well, here it paints a different picture. That mixed in with the iron, we have indeed dictatorships. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. So we're in a divided world. This is where we are now. And there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. Now the iron is mixed with miry clay, in that you indeed have dictatorships and you indeed have democracies, but mixed in with the democracies will indeed be dictators that are working together with the dictators that are in the northern part of the kingdom that's prophesied in Daniel chapter 11. This is important to understand because it gives you the politics of the kingdom of the north and the kingdom of the south in the last days. You'll have the kingdom of the north will be dictatorships and the kingdom of the south will be democracies. And mingled in with the democracies will indeed be the strength of the iron, the dictators. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. In other words, These dictatorships are mingled together with democracies, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with miry clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all of these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. This is because of the second coming of Jesus Christ. This is where we are now. In short, we have democracies and dictatorships. We also have democracies with mixed in with this miry clay will also be the strength of the iron. So have no illusions. You might indeed think you are living in the free world, being the democratic world, but mixed in with this miry and slushy clay are indeed dictators that are working together with the kingdom of the king of the north that is prophesied in the writings of Daniel in Daniel chapter 11. So it's important to understand this background history of the last days, the day and age we are now living in, if you want a broader, wider picture of really the politics of the world in the last days being dictatorships and democracies in short, which would be manifest being communism and capitalism in the last days. And of course you also have the question of mystery Babylon the Great. In her was found the blood of saints and prophets, and all that was slain upon the therefore the worship of money being the cause. Mystery Babylon, the love of materialism and wealth, and the worship of materialism, as in the worship of money in the last days, and these largely being capitalistic and democratic so-called kingdoms of the West versus the dictatorial communistic kingdoms of the North. Of the Russia and China and so on, all these said communistic countries and autocratic dictatorial countries that we now have versus the democratic countries in the last days. This being important to understand, because this really gives us the politics of the kingdom of the king of the north and the king of the south that comes up in the prophecies and writings of Daniel in Daniel chapter 11. So all of that to say, this is kind of an ongoing conversation that Daniel's having with this angel, and the angel is talking to Daniel, Daniel having knowledge of former visions and visitations when the angel appears to him, and the angel explaining all of these with the future with these in mind. Each time he would visit Daniel, he would give him another piece of the puzzle. So another piece of the puzzle, but bear in mind he also had these other pieces of the puzzle in his hand, which were all building up a picture of the last days. And each time Daniel got these prophecies, it would always home in on the last days and give some kind of insight and understanding as what kind of world we would all be living in, God's children would be living in. They were not necessarily given to Daniel in his day and age, though they were, but largely they were given to God's children in the last days, being really the Christians, in fact, that are still living here in the last days, including what's left of the children of Israel, and even regarding the remnant of the children of Israel in the last days, and regarding the land of Israel in the last days. So all of these coming up in prophecy. And Israel, throughout all of this, the land of Israel, and God's children, be they of Jewish lineage, or be they of other Gentiles that were grafted in, wild olive branches that were grafted in to the olive tree. All of these, all concerning these, the true spiritual children of Israel in the last days, no matter what nation or country or kindred or tongue they come from. If they have Jesus in their heart, if they've indeed had a born-again experience and become a new creature in Christ Jesus, they are indeed children of Abraham by faith. So regarding all of these, the prophecies of Daniel regarding God's children all over the world, the kingdom of God all over the world, in every country now, not just in the land of Israel, in the last days. So to give us some picture and insight into what to expect in the last days, we are indeed to expect dictatorships and democracies in the last days, the world divided into two camps. And this summed up as the kingdom of the king of the north in the writings of Daniel chapter 11, and the kingdoms of the king of the south, all of these under the king of the north, king of the south. And this is the kind of world we're all going to inherit as brought to us by all of these beastly world empires down through the ages, the great evolution, but rather better said, the devolution of man in the last days, and bringing us into man at his greatest, which will be man at his worst, just before the second coming of Jesus Christ, culminating in this great battle between the kingdom of the king of the north and the kingdom of the king of the south. Dictatorships in the north, democracies in the south, communism in the north, and capitalism and slushy clay kingdoms in the south, but mixed in with the kingdom of the south will indeed be the strength of the iron, and these dictatorships will indeed be working together with the kingdom of the king of the north in the last days. So a great conspiracy. People now say these two are two sides of the same face. Well, this would be true. But they're indeed like criminals who work together to, when they go to share out the booty, suddenly this war breaks out as to who has the lion's share, as usually, as always, it does. So not quite black and white in the Bible paint a picture. Yes, two sides of the same face. But also like criminals that work together, put their heads together and arguing and fighting over the booty and as to who has the lion's share. Hence, you will have the great war between the king of the north, king of the south in the last days. Thus, the prophecies of Daniel suddenly leap way into the future, as from Daniel chapter 11, verse 21. Leaping as it always did in Daniel chapter 2, leaping into the future in the last days, as it did in Daniel chapter 7, talking about this little horn that would indeed wax great, and as it did in Daniel chapter 8, talking again of the little horn that would indeed wax great, as it did in Daniel chapter 9, talking again of the prince of the covenant that will confirm the covenant with many in the last days, as it does again, leaping way into the future in Daniel chapter 11, where indeed it reintroduces this little horn, this prince of the covenant, as from verse 21, talking again of the prince of the covenant, as the angel did in Daniel chapter 9, this being the little horn and Antichrist. So now we're going to leap into the last days, being the kingdom of the king of the north, verse 21, Daniel 11:21, after the standing up of various kingdoms of the king of the north versus kingdoms of the king of the south. God's people and Israel kicked up and down, backwards and forwards, like a football in between these. Again, in the last days, you're going to have the question of the promised land and Israel. You're going to have the question of the children of Israel. You're going to have the question of God's children being spiritual Israel in the last days. All of this brought to Daniel to talk to this generation, to this day and age, to God's people, whether they be the bloodline children of Israel, whether they be the kingdom of God on earth all around the world. Born again Christians, new creatures in Christ Jesus, these being spiritual Israel in the last days. Now speaking to these, suddenly again leaping into the future, and the angel now leaps into the future, introduces the kingdom of the king of the north, the Seleucid world empire, the kingdom of the king of the south, the Ptolemaic world empire, suddenly leaps into the latter time of their kingdom, as he said he would do in Daniel chapter 8, in the latter time of their kingdom, in the latter time of the kingdom that these four generals inherited when Alexander the Great died. In the latter time of their kingdom, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences will indeed stand up. This is where the angel's going, and so he's leaping into the future. And now he reaches his point and gets to Daniel chapter 11, verse 21, and reintroduces again the little horn that stood up in Daniel chapter 7, the little horn that stood up in Daniel chapter 8, the Prince of the Covenant that stood up in Daniel chapter 9. Now he brings to light again talk of this Prince of the Covenant and gives Daniel some kind of insight into his method and how he rises to power in the north. So verse 21, in the place of the former king, this former king, you're looking at the Seleucid Empire, which declined You look up the date when it declined, actually it declined in about 64 BC. Wow, it declined then, but this angel's leaping into the future, leaping over Rome, and now going into the latter time of their kingdom in the last days. And so he lands slap bang in the middle of verse 21, as he always did for all of these prophecies, suddenly bringing Daniel's attention to the last days and this last great king that would stand up in the last days, this little horn and Antichrist, this prince of the covenant that would stand up in the last days, this great king, this great dictatorial communistic king that would stand up in the last days just before the second coming of Jesus Christ. And so the last king that is prophesied in this in the writings of Daniel chapter 11 is indeed the prince of the covenant. So in the place of the former king and the latter time of their kingdom, don't forget, leaping over Rome here, the main focus again being this king that will stand up in the last days. In his estate, in the place of the former king, shall stand up a vile person. This is the Antichrist. This is the little horn. Now it talks about how he's going to wax great. He starts out small. He worms his way in. He starts as a little horn. In Daniel 8, it speaks of this little horn waxing great. He waxes strong towards the south, towards the east, and towards the pleasant land, towards the land of Israel. So the land of Israel, very much called the promised land in the Old Testament, and God's children caught up in these various wars between these various world empires, and then going into captivity in Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, and from then onwards being in captivity to these various world empires, as they will be until the second coming of Jesus Christ. The same will be true of God's children. We're not just talking about the land of Israel here and the rebuilding of the second temple. We're also talking the children of Israel, the children of God, the children of Israel being spiritual Israel. Those that are grafted in, the wild olive branches that are grafted in to the olive tree, being the Christians of all ages, really, but largely we're talking about the New Testament era here. So Christians in the last days, God's people in the last days. This prophecy speaking to these in the last days, telling us how it's going to be. Yes, dictatorships and democracies. King of the North largely being dictatorships, King of the South. And don't forget, now we have a broader, wider picture, and so this prophecy expands right here in verse 21. And in his estate, in the place of the former king, the Hellenistic empire, as they called Hellenistic period after the death of Alexander the Great, you look this up and history says it's the Hellenistic period. So from the death of Alexander the Great to the death of Cleopatra the Seventh, in fact, in 30 BC, in fact, this is how it plays out. That's what they call the Hellenistic period of history. This Hellenized the world, and it all became like Greek culture being thrust upon the world through this empire. And some say that the world then had the world then was all speaking Greek, and therefore when Jesus came, it was easier for the gospel to spread because more people could speak Greek. So it's kind of all entwined in history, and it's all very important aspects of history. But the angels leaping over this Hellenistic period, if you look it up, they're all different ages. You have the Hellenistic age, that period of the decline of the Seleucid Empire in the north. But in the latter time of their kingdom, the Seleucid Empire still be here. All of these countries that are under the Seleucid Empire would have been Syria mainly comes up, then you'd have Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, all these various countries, the Levant, which is Israel, they're all under the Seleucid Empire. Well, what's going to happen in the last days? It's going to kind of be revisited in that it's given you the location as to where the Antichrist will rise up in the last days. It will indeed rise up north of Israel. So north in Israel, you had the Seleucid world empire under Antiochus, and it was a bloodline family. You had a dynasty there. You had Antiochus I, Antiochus II, Antiochus III. You had Antiochus Epiphanes and all these. So Antiochus Epiphanes, the problem is a lot of these Bible scholars and lecturers and great men, they follow through on the history and they don't look at Daniel, the writings of Daniel and the prophecies of Daniel as a whole. Well, this angel, it's an ongoing conversation with Daniel, and you have to understand, you have to backtrack, with these prophecies to understand where the angel's coming from, as they say. So when the Antichrist starts talking about the Prince of the Covenant, you think, aha, I know what he's talking about, because he talks about the Prince of the Covenant back in Daniel chapter 9. So indeed, you have the Prince of the Covenant coming up in this prophecy. And you have this vile person, this little whore, this belligerent man that would be more stout than his fellows, more belligerent, more stubborn, more pushy. This vile person that would try to wear out the saints of the Most High. This king that would stand up in the north, whose power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. His power is coming from Satan. All of this culminating and climaxing in Daniel chapter 11. So reintroducing the kingdom of the king of the north, and therefore reintroducing the little horn of Daniel chapter 7, the little horn of Daniel chapter 8, the prince of the covenant that would stand up in Daniel chapter 9, the one that would confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, being 7 years. This king will stand up, and therefore the angel now leaps into the last part of this vision and prophecy and talks, as he always did, of this last king that would stand up before the second coming of Jesus Christ. And he talks of how he comes to power in the north. Personally, I choose to see this as talking about how this king will worm his way in, how this king will snuck in, how it will come in with deceit, how he, in fact, will start out small and will wax great. The little horn will indeed wax great. It starts out small, he starts out small, symbolizes little horn. And so it says in verse 21, in his estate, in the place of the former king, shall stand up a vile person. This is the Antichrist. St. Paul called him man of sin. Latter time, a man of sin will stand up. So it's a man. In his estate, the place of the former king of the kingdom of the king of the north, the Seleucid world empire in the last days. It won't be called the Seleucid empire. We still have Syria. It was Syria back then. You wonder if he's going to snuck into Syria. Indeed, you have communism, Putin in Syria, keeping the peace here. And don't forget, the Antichrist uses peace to worm his way in. He comes in with a special military operation bringing peace. But actually, underneath it all, it turns out he's a vile man. The Antichrist might even start out as a good man. He might even be working under Satan, and Satan appearing to him as an angel of light. Well, this is the broad picture of the last days, but indeed, underneath it all, he's actually a vile person. This prophecy here, foretelling of this Antichrist that will stand up in the north, and his estate, the place of the former king, shall stand up a vile person. This is indeed the Antichrist, the man of sin, to whom they shall not give the honour of the kingdom. Well, he doesn't get the honour of the kingdom, so he's a dishonourable man, stands to reason. They don't give him the honour of the kingdom. He's a vile person. He's trying to worm his way into the seat of power. He's trying to come in to present himself as the king of the kingdom of the north. It says he's the little horn, and that he's more stout than his fellows. He's a very determined man. He's a stubborn man. He's a pushy man. He's a belligerent man. He's a man that doesn't give up. He's a man that's going to wax great, so much so that he waxes great even to the host of heaven and casts some of the host to the ground and the stars to the ground. These being the children of God in the last days that the Antichrist will indeed trample upon, but he doesn't stop there. He magnifies himself even to the prince of the host, being Jesus Christ. So he's indeed the very Antichrist. He eventually thinks an evil form, becomes possessed of Satan, and starts challenging heaven, even heaven itself, waving his fist not only at the saints on earth in those days, but also waving his fist at heaven. In the last days, this is him. This is the Antichrist. This is the last king that stands up in the writings of Daniel chapter 11 before the second coming of Jesus Christ. It stands to reason. We're not talking Antiochus Epiphanes here. We're talking the Antichrist, what a lot of Bible scholars scholars do. They go follow through on the history. They forget that the history of Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9 is an ongoing conversation with the angel Gabriel, and the angel Gabriel referring to former conversations, referring to this Prince of the Covenant, therefore referring to the Prince of the Covenant that confirms the covenant with many in the last days before the second coming of Jesus Christ. So, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person in the place of the former kings, to whom they shall not give the honour of the kingdom. So he worms his way in, he's not in line for the throne. But he shall come in peaceably, uses peace methods to get in. You see Putin, I'm not saying Putin's the Antichrist, but you see an Antichrist, a picture of the same, let's say. Well, Putin is certainly a pushy man, a belligerent man, a stubborn man. Does anyone on this earth believe he's going to give up? You ask any person on this earth, will he give up? No, he won't. He's a pushy man, a stubborn man, a belligerent man, and in him you see the characteristics of Antichrist. Now, he could be a forerunner of the Antichrist. He's simply tuned into the prince of the power of the air. We know there's the prince of the power of the air, and the course of this world is going according to the course of the prince of the power of the air. The spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. Wow, the spirit of in the children of disobedience could be Satan working together in the heart of any man on earth, and therefore the world is moving with the times, and therefore the times are being moved by the spiritual. The spiritual world is moving the kingdoms of man, the fleshly kingdom of man. We know that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wow, the spiritual wickedness that's in high places is manifest in the kingdoms of this earth. And therefore they're all being manipulated, and they will all be going Satan's way. Whether they appear to be on this side or that side, whether they appear to be two sides of the same face or not, whether they're all out for the kingdom of man, whether they're all out for the kingdom of Satan. Either way, each one would be manipulated by Satan himself. If you're not with Jesus, then you're against him. Therefore, you'll fall prey to the Antichrist world empire, as will the children of Israel in the last days. They're not for Jesus Christ, therefore they're against Jesus Christ, and therefore they will fall prey to the Antichrist, this vile person that's standing up in the north, when he eventually invades Israel from the north. So in his estate, in the place of the former king, shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honour of the kingdom. So he's not in line for the throne, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. He has men's persons in admiration because of advantage, like a man wants to get a woman in bed. Therefore, he flatter her because he has ulterior motives. Well, it's much the same with the Antichrist. He wants these kingdoms under his belt. Therefore, he uses flattery. He has men's person in admiration because of advantage. These are the tactics of the Antichrist coming in the last days. He's going to use flattery. He'll make people feel special and important and offer them promotion in his kingdom, in other words. He'll come in peaceably. He says he's a man of peace, but he's actually a man of war. And with the arm, verse 22, with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him. So he clearly has a lot of weaponry under his arsenal and so on, and therefore you could picture some of these kings of the kingdom of the north confiding in this man and using his powerful weapons to bring peace to their land, as could even be true of the children of Israel if they see an opportunity in this kingdom of the king of the north to bring peace to their land, and they work together with the king of the kingdom of the north, as is true today. You have Israel working together with Putin in Syria because he's working together in their favour. So this is how it's going to be in the last days. This Antichrist king will eventually worm his way in. You could say, if you see the Antichrist or that line of characteristics in Putin, he certainly wormed his way into Syria. Syria was the main kind of central capital of this elusive world empire, and you had Putin keeping the peace there. Keeping the peace for who? Israel. So he's wormed his way into Israel. Israel favours Putin in the north, therefore you have grounds for communism, you have grounds for Russia, you have grounds for Putin worming his way into Syria, worming his way into Israel. And of course, in the last days, you're going to have this great peace covenant that when this Prince of the Covenant stands up and confirms the covenant with many. You'll have a king that stands up with so much political clout that he'll work together and favour the Jews in the last days, he'll favour Israel in the last days, and they'll see him as the long-awaited and foretold Messiah that comes and works together with them in their favour, giving them the kingdoms of this world, but he working together with them, and then double crosses him, breaks the covenant. Now, Jesus Christ will never break the covenant. This Antichrist will indeed break the covenant. He confirms the covenant with many for 1 week, for 7 years, but in the midst of the week, he causes the sacrifice and oblation to cease. In other words, he causes the sacrifice and religious worship of the Jews to cease, and then places the abomination of desolation. This is that same king that stands up in the north. This is not talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. It's talking, Antiochus Epiphanes means Antiochus, one of these bloodline kings that came from the Antiochus family line of the Hellenistic era, and he sets up, he forbids worship of the Jewish worship in the temple of his day. You're talking about 170 BC, his day. But then he sacrifices a pig on the altar and demands the worship of Zeus, sets up a statue of Zeus. And so it is not talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. It kind of reminds you of the same, but it's not talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. It's talking about the last king that will indeed stand up in the north, and it talks of how this king will worm his way in. It's the little horn worming his way into the kingdom of the north, and this little horn will indeed wax great. It's talking of his method. He's using peace, he's using flattery, he's using war, and he finally snucks in and finds his way in and makes a league with the kingdom of the king of the north, start looking to him as a kind of a guard, looking after their interests, and they're in league with him. In fact, the kingdoms of the king of the north will be in league eventually with this little horn. In fact, even the children of Israel will be in league with him, as they are already. They're in league with Putin, because they see him as working together in their interest in keeping peace in Syria, keeping Iran out, and all this sort of stuff which favours Israel in the last days. So it's kind of the groundwork, you think, to the Holy Covenant in the last days. So with the arms of a flood shall they be overflowed from before him. This great peacekeeper might use war to bring peace, and shall be broken. So imagine this, that you have this king come in, he's got great weapons of war, he's got a nice big army, he's got all these modern day weapons, he can, he's bigger and better than other kingdoms around him, he can throw his weight around, he's the bully of the area, let's say, and no one dare tackle him. Where you have him come into your country as a peacemaker, then he can keep your enemies out and he will favour your country, and therefore he favours Israel. Israel is caught up in the middle of all this, and Israel making these various concessions and alliances with these various kings. In that day, the Seleucid World Empire or the Ptolemaic Empire in the south. But in the last days, aligning with the very king of the north, with the very Antichrist, and assuming him or believing him to be the long-awaited and foretold Messiah. So with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yea, now the angel makes his great announcement. He comes to his point. Yea, also the Prince of the Covenant. What he's saying here is, yea, also this is the Prince of the Covenant. The way it's put in Old English might suggest that this Prince of the Covenant is broken. No, this kingdom, this Prince of the Covenant is not broken. This indeed is the Prince of the Covenant. Yea, also he's saying the Prince of the Covenant. Yea, also what I'm talking about here is the Prince of the Covenant. This is him. This is the little horn. This is the little horn of Daniel chapter 7. This is the little horn of Daniel Daniel chapter 8, this is the Prince of the Covenant, the one that confirms the covenant. This is him. And after the league made with him, so he finally muscles his way in through war and peace, and they start yielding to him. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. So he's wormed his way into the seat of power. He's a dishonourable man, and he's come in with his great weapons of war, and he's apparently keeping the peace. He's a man of peace, though he uses war to bring peace. So they eventually see in this man, this is a great guy. This guy's bringing peace to the region. So even Israel's going to think, yes, this man is a great guy. He's bringing peace to the region. So they're in league with him. They're in agreement with him. Doesn't mean they've confirmed the covenant here. Doesn't mean he's confirmed the covenant here. It means they are in league with him. He's coming to power in the north. It's talking about how he's coming to power in the north. This affecting God's people. This even affecting Israel. In the last days, Israel caught up in the middle of all of this, and Israel sometimes now is favouring this king of the north who's bringing peace to their land in the last days. He's coming to power in the north. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. So he's got in. He's now in a better position of power. They've let him in. They've made a league with him. They're in an agreement with him. He's wormed his way in. He's won their respect. He's won them over. He's flattered them. He's made them feel like great, important people. He has their interests in mind. They need this man's help. They need his peace. They need his weapons. So he's wormed his way in. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. So he's got in. This is the Antichrist. For he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. Well, so they usually become strong with great weapons of war, which he does. But now he's becoming strong with a small people. He appeals to these small people. You think, well, I guess he must appeal to these underdogs, these downtrodden people. And therefore he's becoming great with their interests in mind. He flatters them. Why should you be pushed around by these great powers? Why should you be pushed around by these great capitalistic empires? Why should you be pushed around by these tyrants? Why should you be pushed around by these kings that come in and pillage and rape and kill and destroy and take and steal? Why should you continue to let these oppressors oppress you and steal all the money from you and steal all the riches from you and steal all the riches and hoard them up for themselves? So he's bringing in a new form of government. He's going to do something which his fathers have not done. So he's bringing in really a form of communism, taking from the rich and giving to the poor. So he's coming to power with the little people. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. For he shall come in and shall become strong with a small people. He shall enter peaceably upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey, the spoil, and the riches. So he's taking from the poor. Something he's taking from the rich and giving to the poor. Something his fathers, his ancestors in these Seleucid world empires, these kings, they always oppressed the poor. They always stole from the poor and hoarded the riches away for themselves. They always went to war with other countries, stole their wealth, stole their riches, stole their gold, and hoarded it away from them for themselves. They didn't give to the poor. They themselves just got richer, this elite class at the top. Well, the Antichrist is saying it's enough of all of this. It's enough of this capitalistic Western world thinking. It's enough of Mystery Babylon the Great. It's time we rose up against the whore of Babylon. It's time we rose up against materialism. It's time we rose up against the corrupt West. It's time we brought in a power to the people government where the poor have all of these riches given to them. So he shall enter peaceably upon the fattest places of the province. This is all in the north. He's taking over the north. You picture, well, I guess some of these northern countries have succumbed to the Western world thinking of being exploited by the dictators in the Western world, exploited by the money-making warmongers, the money-making capitalists, the money-making merchantmen of the West that manipulate the governments, the money-making under Mystery Babylon the Great, whore of Babylon kingdoms in the Western world. This really now is the kingdom of the king of the south in the last last days. So you have the kingdom of the king of the north, the dictatorial, communistic, autocratic governments, the iron-fisted, just like Rome, taking over, but coming in through subtlety and using peace and taking from the rich and giving to the poor. This is the politics of the Antichrist in the last days. This is the little horn waxing great, so much so that he waxes strong even and great even to the host of heaven. This is him waxing great. The little horn here is waxing great. He starts winning these kingdoms over in the north. He starts winning the people over in the north till he gets to a position of strength. He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province in the north. And he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. They didn't share their riches with the poor. They always took from the poor and gave to the rich. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and the riches. Yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds even for a time. So he doesn't stop there. He keeps going. He keeps forecasting, foretelling what he's going to do. His politics, his kingdom, his taking from the rich and giving to the poor is going to start sweeping through, even eventually into the whole world. He starts sweeping through into this northern kingdom way of thinking. And they're all going over to this little horn, this little horn that waxes great. And they're all seeing him as the hero and champion of the poor. You picture these little people that he comes to power with and through. These overthrowing their own kingdoms in the north, and he now taking over in the north. This is all about the Antichrist taking over in the north. And he continues to wax great, and he forecasts his devices against the stronghold, even for a time. So he keeps going from strength to strength. He waxes great, even for a time, as prophesied. He comes in the little horn. He eventually waxes great, even for a time, foretelling what he's going to do. He has history on his side. He has fate on his side. He has these prophecies on his side. And of course, he's going to wax great, even for a time, as prophesied. And finally gets to a position of strength. And what does he do? And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the kingdom, against the king of the south. So here he is. He finally waxes great. He waxes strong in the north. He sneaks in. He comes to power. He's all for people power. He's all for peace. He's all for taking from the rich and giving to the poor. He rises up against these said oppressors of the people that take from the poor and give to the rich. He now finds himself eventually in this great position of strength, so much so that he now declares war on the kingdom of the king of the south. He's declaring war on the capitalistic West. He's declaring war on the mystery Babylon, the great money-worshipping, mammon-worshipping kingdom of the West. All of this under the kingdom of the king of the south. All of this now, the kingdom of the king of the south. In the last days, Israel now even defected over to the mystery Babylon, the great world empire, the capitalistic world empire. She having her own interests in, at first, using this king, thinking he favours them. This king appears to favour Israel in the last days, but then this king is going to even turn upon them. They thinking he's the long-awaited Messiah, they using him. But he eventually using Israel to get into a position of power, and then he double-crosses the children of Israel and breaks the covenant. Something the prince of the covenant, the true prince of the covenant, Jesus Christ, would never do. But this Antichrist will break the covenant. So he finally reaches a point and position of power in the north. He comes to power in the north. And at this point, verse 25, and he shall stir up his power and his courage. He's come to power in the north and he's got all this power now. He finally gets into a position of power, so much so that he's even going to challenge the kingdom of the king of the south. He's now ready to challenge them. He's now ready to impose his will upon them. He's now ready to bring in this great covenant, this last day covenant, this great peace agreement. He's now eventually ready to bring them into his great kingdom. This is the Antichrist waxing strong. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. With the arms of a flood, these two are going to be broken by him. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. So the world again split into two camps. You have dictatorships and democracies in the last days. Dictatorships, the kingdom of the king of the north. Democracies, the kingdom of the king of the south in the last days. These are the politics now. The kingdom of the king of the north is now going to impose his will upon the kingdom of the king of the south. And so he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south, and with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. The king of the south is not going to stand, in other words, for this king of the north is going to forecast devices against him. He's foretelling his evil schemes and plans. In other words, he's kind of prophesying here. He knows, in fact, that he has Satan on his side. He knows, in fact, that the kingdoms of the world are in the hands of the kingdom of Satan. He knows the way things are set to go. He knows he's destined to win here. And so he's forecasting his devices against the stronghold, even for a time. He's foretelling what he's going to do. He's foretelling his evil schemes and plans of what he's going to do. He's come to power in the north. He's now reached a position of power and strength. He wormed his way in. He's the little Hallmark's great. He becomes so great, he becomes so powerful, he now thinks he's ready to take on the kingdom of the king of the south. He's going to take on the democratic world. He's going to take on capitalism. He's going to indeed bring down capitalism. He's going to indeed bring down the democracies of the Western world. He's going to indeed impose his will upon them. He's going to indeed insist that they enter into a covenant with him, an agreement with him. He indeed wants them to enter into this covenant with him, which will indeed be a religious element to this covenant, which will be the holy covenant. So indeed it's a covenant, it's an agreement that he's going to make with the West. He's in a position of strength. He's going to take on the Western world. He's going to take on democracies. He's going to take on capitalism. He's going to bring them under his will, under his arm, and he's going to get them to surrender and surrender to his terms of the agreement. He's going to favour Israel in all of this and bring them into a holy covenant. So the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty armies, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. They forecast his evil schemes and plans. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat. This is talking about the kingdom of the king of the south. Here's the strength of the iron in the kingdom of the king of the south. Yea, verse 26, yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat. In other words, those that sit around the same table, kingdom of the king of the south, these top ministers and alliances of kingdoms, all under democracy, they're all sat around one table here. And yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him. In other words, there's saboteurs, there's double agents working together in the kingdom of the king of the south. Just as Daniel prophesied, there be in the strength of the iron mixed in with the miry clay. These democracies, these iron dictatorships are mixed in together with him, with the kingdom of the king of the south. And they're going to be working together with this Antichrist, the great conspiracy, working together with him and bringing him in, sabotaging their own countries, telling the kingdom of the king of the north the plans of the king of the south, and therefore the king of the kingdom of the north knowing exactly where to strike. These bringing the whole world into a great new world order under the kingdom of the king of the north, and the king of the north now rising to power and bringing the whole world under his strong arm and bringing them into this great holy covenant, favouring Israel and bringing the world into a holy covenant. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him. In other words, saboteurs in the kingdom of the king of the south, destroying the kingdom of the king of the south, destroying their own governments and the democracies, and bringing down capitalism, working together with the king of the north. And his armies, in other words, his armies, the king of the north, his armies, shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. So coming in again with the arms of a flood, talking peace, but coming in with the arms of a flood, and bringing down the capitalistic Western world, and bringing them under his arm. And then you have this great peace talk where they all sat round one table. This, personally, I choose to believe this is where the covenant is signed. This is where he confirms the covenant. This is where he confirms the covenant with many. He rises to a position of power and strength. He gets all of his courage up and takes over, starts this great war with the king of the south, with the kingdoms of the king of the south, in fact. And he wins in this war, many shall fall down slain. Now he's in a position to impose his will upon them all. They all have to agree to the terms of the surrender. And therefore he now imposing his will upon them. He favouring the Jews still in this prophecy and bringing the world into a holy covenant. Him favouring the religious elements in all of these various governments and bringing them all into this holy covenant. So in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Here he is confirming the covenant. He comes to power in the north. He starts this great war with the kingdom of the king of the south. He overthrows these democratic, slushy, clay-like governments. And now he imposes his will upon them. And they're all sat round one table in verse 27. And both these kings' hearts, so here they are sat round the table, shall be to do mischief. They're all reluctantly agreeing to this holy covenant, in other words. And both these kings' hearts, the king of the north, the king of the south, king of the north and all of his allies, the kingdom of the king of the south and all of the allies of the king of the south, shall speak lies. The kingdom of the king of the south, don't forget, is largely Israel. Israel was always south of the king of the north. Who's the kingdom of the king of the south now? Back then it was Egypt. Where is Israel now? Yeah, they've gone back to the land of Israel, granted, but their hearts are still in Egypt. The kingdom of the king of the south is all under Israel. Israel is largely the king of the kingdom of the king of the south. All of these various countries of the democratic world, the capitalistic world, are all under Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abomination of the earth. In her was found the blood of saints and prophets and all that was slain upon the earth. In the children of Israel in their past, there's the blood of saints and prophets. These all part of Mystery Babylon the Great. So the kingdom of the king of the north, these shall hate the whore, the Antichrist here imposing his will upon the kingdom of the south, being largely the capitalistic Western world. All part of the kingdom of the king of the south. Well, both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper. So they sat round one table, apparently talking peace. But they're all talking mischief, they're all lying to each other. For yet the end shall be at the time appointed. So it's saying, and both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. In other words, they're all sat round one table. The king of the kingdom of the north has won in this great war. He's now imposing his will upon the kingdom of the king of the south. And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. And they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. The end is prophesied to happen, and this angel's come in to prophesy the end as it will happen in the end times, as prophesied by God. So though they're apparently making peace here, though they're entering into, in other words, this covenant, this agreement, which indeed will have a holy covenant element to it, it's a holy covenant because you have Israel in the mix here. You have the Holy Covenant in the mix here. You have the Prince of the Covenant who confirms the covenant with many in the last days here in this prophecy. What he's doing, he's imposing his will upon the whole world. And they're entering into an agreement, a Holy Covenant, in fact. And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. They're lying round one table. The guns are still out under the table. And they shall speak lies at one table, but shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed as prophesied. This peace won't work. When they shall say peace and safety, then cometh sudden destruction upon them, and they shall not escape. So what you have is a form of peace and safety here, the signing, as it would appear, of the Holy Covenant right here in verse 27. This is where the covenant is all signed. But the guns are still out under the table. It's not a Holy Covenant. They're all speaking mischief. It's apparently a Holy Covenant, and they're all signing up to it. This Antichrist is confirming his the covenant with many for 1 week here. The last 7 years before Jesus returns. This is the Antichrist imposing his will upon the kingdom of the south. This is the Antichrist bringing all of these religious elements of all of these arguments that go on in the world together, and all signing this Holy Covenant agreement, the king of the south, communism, and capitalism now in one accord, and putting down their weapons of war and making peace. The religions of the world are putting down their religious quarrels and weapons of war even, and making peace. This being the great religious holy covenant that the Antichrist will confirm, as it says in Daniel chapter 9:27, and he, this false and fake Messiah, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Though it might not be announced as 1 week, they might think it's going to go on forever, but the angel's already told us. He already told us it's going to be the last week of Daniel, the last 7 years. We know that when they confirm this covenant with many, when the Antichrist confirms the covenant with many, we're looking at the last 7 years of world history before Jesus returns. And so it says, for the end, but it shall not prosper. In other words, this holy covenant won't prosper. This is where they signed the Holy Covenant. It has to be where they signed the Holy Covenant. Verse 27. Both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. They're lying to each other around one table, apparently entering into an agreement and even a Holy Covenant. And they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. The time appointed was prophesied in past prophecies. You're looking at the breaking of the covenant, which comes in as a result of the covenant being confirmed. The covenant will be broken in the midst of the week, as prophesied. This holy covenant that's supposed to bring the world into peace forever will fail after 7 years, as prophesied, and yet the end shall be at the time appointed. But it shall not prosper. This peace talk and agreement and holy covenant will not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Then, now here's the Antichrist, then the prince of the covenant, then shall he return into his land with great riches. He gets a lot out of this holy covenant. He's brought down the Western world. He's brought them into an agreement with him. He's got them all to sign up to his whole new world order. He's got them all under his iron-fisted arm. He's the king that stands up. He's the metal, he's the iron-fisted rule of Rome, in this sense, coming in. He's a form of an emperor of Rome, and now he's brought down his iron-fisted arm and imposed his will upon them and stamped the residue, stamped all of these kingdoms with his iron fist. He's now got his stamp on them. They've entered into this holy covenant with him. Reluctantly, they're all lying round one table. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant. He's confirmed the covenant with many, but his heart is against it. He knows their heart is against it. He knows it's not a holy covenant, it's an unholy covenant. His heart is against the holy covenant. He's against the holy covenant right from the beginning. He was merely using the Jews to get into a position of power. He's now come to power in the north. He's overtaken the kingdom of the king of the south. He's imposed his will upon them. He knows that they're all lying round one table. He smells the rat. Then shall he return into his own land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. So he goes back, a bragger and a boaster. He's showing off his great power, his military muscle and might. He's jumping and leaping. He's won the war here. He's now king of the world. He's now champion of the poor. He's now brought the world into this great holy covenant. He's now put his kingdom above the kingdom of the king of the West. He's now king, lord, and master. He goes away, then shall he return to his land with great riches. And his heart shall be against the holy covenant. And he shall do exploits, he exploits and shows off his great military muscle and might. and return to his own land. And at the time appointed he shall return and come towards the south. So time goes by, he comes towards the south again. I guess he's smelling a rat here. There's something stirring in the kingdom of the king of the south. The Holy Covenant is starting to go awry. He smells a rat. His heart is against the Holy Covenant. Their heart was against the Holy Covenant. They all signed up to this Holy Covenant. There was mischief as they all talked lies around one table. The guns were still out under the table. His heart was against the Holy Covenant. They all signed up reluctantly to this Holy Covenant. At the time appointed shall he return and come towards the south, but it shall not be for as the former or as the latter. Normally he'd come south and he'd always wave his fist and down on the kingdom of the king of the south and smash them. This time there's a stir of war in the air. The peace covenant is all going wrong. And suddenly there's war. It shall not be as the former as the latter. So the peace is now being broken.